opinion of kale predict just how likely you are to become addicted to nicotine? Weirdly, maybe, and let me explain why. Now, when I ask people to name off bitter foods, they're kind of the common ones that you think of, which are like dark chocolate and coffee and hoppy beer. And you might be like, okay, but a lot of people don't like them, and that's true. And that is because we as humans don't really like bitter things that much, because evolutionarily, we're not really supposed to. So bitter has always been this kind of signal that like this thing might have poison in it. A lot of poisons are bitter, and so a lot of people are like, I don't like this bitter food because our brain is telling us, yeah, you probably shouldn't. And so things that are high in the international bitterness units, which great banding there too, typically are more disliked. So you have to like learn to love coffee. You have to learn to like hoppy beers. In a lot of cases, it's just because over time you're pairing them with things that you enjoy, like caffeine and alcohol. Now, there are some people who are more sensitive to that bitter flavor and therefore less likely to like bitter foods. And first, those are children. Children in general are more sensitive to bitter foods. And so we've actually taken advantage of this and tried to make certain like medications more bitter so children are less likely to get into them and want to continue using them. But then there's also a genetic susceptibility to bitterness too. So some people have this specific genetic polymorphism that make them more likely to taste the bitter thing and then less likely to enjoy that because it tastes more bitter to them. Now, you might be like, what does this have to do with nicotine? And it has a lot to do with nicotine because we use nicotine in a way that affects our sense of taste. So when people are smoking or vaping, or even using things like nicotine pouches, they are tasting the flavor of that drug. And in this case, nicotine and tobacco, yeah, they're pretty bitter actually. Nicotine, the higher concentration you get in things like vapes, the more bitter it actually is. So it seems like people who are more sensitive to that bitter taste would be less likely to use nicotine. And is that true? Well, some of the science says it is. They originally did this study like over a decade ago where they looked at like your taste for bitter and whether it made you more likely to become addicted to smoking. And specifically this was done in like Plains American Indians. I'm not sure why this group, but it kind of limits its generalizability, but also so does the rest of psychology research that just works in weird countries. So Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, yeah, those aren't really that generalizable to the entire rest of the world either. So in this study, they looked at something known as phenylthiocarbamide, and this is a chemical that some people taste as bitter and some people taste as like nothingness. And what they found is that if they were more likely to taste that as bitter, so more sensitive to bitter, those people were less likely to have an addiction to smoking. And they did this study in rats too and found that rats who enjoyed the bitter water, like who drink more of that, were also more likely to drink the nicotine water. So there might be this kind of like sensitivity between both of them. Now, in that study in the animals, it was specifically females who were more likely to show this effect. And so we don't know if there's some weird sex difference going on because that's basically all that's out there. Here's the thing, those studies are correlational. We're not actually affecting somebody's ability to sense bitter and seeing if that makes them more or less likely to become addicted. And that is a huge problem because there are multiple things that can go into this. So it could be that the more likely you are to taste bitter, the less likely you are to use nicotine and tobacco. So it could be protective. It could be that the more likely you are to use nicotine and tobacco, the more likely you are to lose your taste of bitter. And we do see that too. And it could be both of those combined. So there are all sorts of things that are potentially going on here. There's another problem. Most of this has been done with smoking and not nicotine at all. Now, as I mentioned, nicotine concentrations, as they go up, they increase in bitterness. So it'll probably show similar results, but we're not entirely sure right now. But hey, this general principle, we should be looking into this because this can help us figure out like how to make vapes that are going to be more or less addictive to people like children. So if we make vape flavors that are less sour, for example, we know that kids love sour. And so if we make vape flavors that have less sour in them, maybe that will prevent kids from kind of picking them up and enjoying them. And maybe we can make vapes to help people quit smoking where the bitterness just kind of increases over days. And so then it becomes more and more aversive. Like when I took Chantix to help quit smoking, one of the biggest things that it did is that made my cigarette taste terrible. And so it could have been because of the rewarding aspects. It could have been because of the taste. I'm not sure. But that really made me help quit smoking. So let's figure out how to use the science for good and take our understanding of taste, bitter, and nicotine to actually help people quit.